So if I have 6 1/3 minus 2 3/4, the first thing I'm going to do is get common denominators, and I end up with 6 4/12 minus 2 9/12. Now when I go to subtract, the first thing you do is you subtract the fraction from the big number minus the fraction from the little number. So what this really means is that we're doing 4/12 minus 9/12. But we can't do that because you can't take away a little fraction from a big fraction. So what we're going to have to do is borrow from the 6 and use some of the 6 to change the fraction 4/12 so that we can have a bigger fraction. So let's see what that looks like. So keep in mind that 6 is the same thing as 5 plus 1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my 6 into 5 plus 1. And keep in mind that 6 4/12 is the same thing as 6 plus 4/12. So if I change my 6 into 5 plus 1, then instead of having 6 4/12, I'm going to have 5 plus 1 plus 4/12. In other words, 5 plus 1 plus 4/12 equals 6 4/12. Same thing. Okay, so that's the first thing you have to understand. Now, what I'm going to do is take this one whole and I'm going to break it so that it has a common denominator with 4/12 so that we can add those together. So I'm going to rewrite my one whole. Instead of writing it as a 1, I'm going to use the common denominator 12 here. And I'm going to write this as this one whole as 12 over 12. So my one whole becomes 12 over 12. So now I have 5 plus 12/12 plus 4/12. Keep in mind this is still equal to 5 plus 1 plus 4/12, which is equal to 6 plus 4/12, which is equal to 6 4/12. So all I've done here is I've rewritten 6 4/12 in a different way. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add my 12/12 and my 4/12 together. And in doing so, I get 5 plus 12 plus 4 is 16 in my numerator, and my common denominator is 12. So 5 and 16/12. So what I've done is I've done what's called regrouping. I've taken one whole out of my 6, and the way that we usually show this is we put a line through the 6, or the whole number that we're borrowing from. So this could be called regrouping or borrowing. I'm taking one whole away from the 6, and what I'm left with is a 5, and you can see that right here. Then I'm going to add the one whole to my 4/12, but the way I'm going to add that one whole is instead of adding it as a 1, I'm going to add it as 12/12 so that I have a common denominator. Remember that the number 1 can be rewritten as any number over itself. So you just pick the common denominator and write that number over itself. So this is going to give me a new fraction of 16/12. So now I have 16/12 minus 9/12. So my problem actually ends up being 5 and 16/12 minus 2 and 9/12. And when I subtract, I can now take 9/12 from 16/12, which is going to be 7/12, and I can take 2 from 5, which is going to be 3. And my answer is 3 and 7/12. So let's look at another example. Let's say we have 8 and 3/9 minus 5 and 4/5. As always, we need to get a common denominator. So take a minute and do that part. So you should end up with 8 and 15 over 45 minus 5 and 36 over 45, since 45 is our common denominator. All right, so now we need to subtract 36/45 from 15/46 45ths, but you can't do that, okay? So 15 minus 36 over 45 doesn't work when we're dealing just with positives. So we'll see something different when we deal with negatives, but with positives, you can't do that, right? You can't take 36 from 15. So instead, what we're going to do is borrow. So we're going to take away 1 whole from 8. So let's think about what 8 would equal. So 8 would equal 7 plus 1. And 8 and 15 45ths would be 7 plus 1 plus 15 over 45. That's the same thing as 8 and 15 45ths. Okay, those are equivalent to each other, just different ways of breaking the numbers up. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the 1 so it has a common denominator with 15 over 45. So since you can write 1 whole as any number over itself, we'll work with 45 over 45 to have a common denominator with 15 over 45. So this is where the regrouping comes in. So now I'm going to have 7 plus 45 plus 15 over 45 because we're adding the numerators and keeping the denominator of those two fractions. So we get 7, 5 and 5 is 10, 2 and 4 is 6, so that's 60 over 45. So what we have just figured out is that 8 and 15 45ths could be rewritten as 7 and 60 over 45 by regrouping. So the way we usually show this is we take 1 away from the 8, so we cross out the 8, and we put a 7. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add 1 whole here, but instead of writing it as a 1, we figured out up here that we would write it as 45 over 45. So instead of writing it as plus 1, I'm going to change that and write it as 45 over 45. Okay, so that 45 over 45 is the same thing as 1 whole. Now, when I add those fractions together, 15 plus 45 was 60, and we keep our denominator of 45. So we've just regrouped 8 and 15 45ths to equal 7 and 60 over 45. So now I can subtract 60 minus 36 is 24 45ths, and 7 minus 5 is 2. So you get 2 and 24 45ths. So I want you to try the next problem and see if you can do it. And then, while the video is paused, and then come back and check. So for the next problem, let's try 7 and 1/5 minus 2 and 3/4. So get your common denominators and then regroup and give that a try. So you should have ended up with 7 and 4/20 minus 2 and 15/20 when you got common denominators. You can't take 15/20 from 4/20, so you're going to have to borrow 1 whole from the 7, so it becomes a 6. And when you add that 1 whole to your fraction, you write it as 20 over 20 so that you can have common denominators. So 4/20 plus 20/20 equals 24/20. And you can see this whole process right up here in black at the top of the screen if you would like to see it in more detail. All right, so now we're going to subtract 2 and 15/20 from 6 and 24/20. 24 minus 15 is 9, and we keep our denominator. And then 6 minus 2 is 4, and our answer is 4 and 9/20.